Welcome to Nantucket Community Television's coverage of the 2020 annual town election, which will be held on Tuesday, June 16. I'm Charlie Walters, and for the next half hour, working remotely due to the virus pandemic, I'll be interviewing Melissa Murphy, one of three candidates seeking to fill two three-year terms on Nantucket Select Board.
That's my pleasure. Thank you guys for doing it. So a wonderful pivot from being interviewed in the studio.
I'll start with an obvious question. Why are you running for Select Board?
I have no idea. No, I'm just kidding. Back in February, when I pulled my papers, I was honestly very on the fence. Having served on the school committee for 3 terms, 9 years, I really am very cognizant of the commitment it takes to serve in a public position, in an elected position. And I wanted to be sure that when I made that commitment, that I could really and truly honor it. And after conversations with my family and my friends, I recognized that I had all the supports in place that I need to feel secure, to roll up my sleeves and get to work. So I am very excited for the opportunity to use my knowledge and my commitment to Nantucket to serve our community.
There are a lot of issues that a select board person has to deal with at any given time, but right now the pandemic, one way or another, seems to affect everything. So I want to talk about that for a few minutes.
Sure.
How concerned are you with having so many summer visitors from all over the United States coming to the island every day at this point?
It's a great question. I would say I'm reasonably concerned. I think that the fact that we will be having more people coming to the island from all over the world puts us at greater risk for having the virus in our community. But I also recognize that the goal is not to have no virus in the community, that the goal is to have protections and safety measures in place so that we can learn to live with coronavirus until such time as there is a vaccine or another way that we can manage it. And that means that we have to listen to protocols from the state and our local health department, wearing masks, a lot of personal responsibility. And I also think that puts the onus on the town, as well as our Chamber of Commerce and every business that interacts with seasonal visitors, which is a lot, to make sure that we're communicating effectively our shared community expectations on personal responsibility and safety and what that means. I think if we can do that, we will certainly have cases of coronavirus, but we will hopefully be able to protect our most vulnerable community members and allow our businesses to be open and take care of the financial and social emotional health of our community members, which is just as important.
Governor Baker's laid out a 4-phase program for getting back to normal or semi-normal or a new normal. First, does Nantucket, meaning the town government, does Nantucket have the ability to lay down more stringent rules and regulations compared to the Commonwealth? And if they do have that power, should they use it?
Yes, they do have that power. And it's important to remember that that power rests with our Board of Health, not with the Select Board. And I think we've seen a remarkable unveiling of the extraordinary power that our Board of Health does have and what a critical and important role they play in our community health and policy making. I believe that Roberto's suggestion and the dashboard created,
That's
which
Roberto
will help.
Santa Maria. That's
I'm sorry?
Roberto Santa Maria.
Roberto Santa Maria. I'm sorry. Yes, our health director. Health and Human Services Director, um, that they're going to have a keen eye on whether or not the virus is going to be having um, an impact on our capacity to deliver healthcare, which I think is a critical. It's why we had our shutdown, right? We recognized quickly that if we surged at the same time as the state, that we weren't going to have the capacity to deliver quality healthcare to our residents. So there's a number of factors I think that have to be considered very carefully about risk and the spread of the virus. And if we start to see those indicators pointing in a direction that our community health is at a high risk, then yes, I do think that steps will be needed to be taken to go backwards. And just to touch on your reference to the 4-phase opening, I think it's very difficult for us here to, for some of us, particularly in businesses that are failing. We're seeing restaurants and retail businesses doing, 90% of the business that they did in years past. The May numbers are coming in and they're just abysmal. And we may start to see businesses fail, which is a real catastrophic effect for our community. So those decisions on going backwards and being more strict have to be really weighed against, again, that financial and social emotional health of our community members.
Sticking with the financial aspect of this, it's been forecast that the town government budget may have a shortfall of over $6 million. That's out of a total budget of around 100. I don't have the exact figure, around $100 million. Keeping in mind that you're running for select board and you're not on the finance committee, how should the town approach that shortfall? What can the town do to make up for the fact that dollars just won't be there in many cases?
I think that the town's going to have to be very creative. I think the biggest, one of the largest stumbling blocks is going to be our revenue is going to be down, and certainly not from our property taxes, which I believe is about 85% of our overall budget income. So we rely on our lodging taxes, meals taxes, other things to bolster that revenue up. I have a lot of faith in Brian Turbot, who's our finance director, and the finance committee to make recommendations to help us live within our means. And at the same time, a commitment to delivering the same quality and essential services to all of our community members. The exact how, when I joined the school committee in 2009, it was really the first budget cycle we were encountering due to the 2008 financial crisis. And it was difficult. We were looking at shortfalls of, $1 million a year in the public school system at a time when we really weren't cognizant of it, but our population was growing. So I know enough to say that I don't have all of the answers. I can't tell you right now what it's going to look like, but it's going to take a commitment between the select board members, the finance committee, town manager, and the finance director to be creative.
One of the mainstays of Nantucket's economy for many years has been the restaurant business. And there's been a lot of discussion about what the restaurant business can and should do this summer if there's going to be an entire summer of social distancing. One of the thoughts that's been put forth is to close off some sidewalks so that restaurants can take advantage of serving people on the sidewalk at tables. How do you feel about that? Because that's not as simple as just putting tables out on the sidewalk.
No, it's really not. But again, it comes down to creativity and out of the box thinking and an acceptance of having to do things differently than we've done them before. And I've also fully seen businesses over the past couple of months make those kinds of decisions for their businesses or those kinds of choices and to think out of the box. And oftentimes it's yielding a greater reward than they could expect. So I think it's our obligation to make sure that licensing and permitting is easy for our businesses to have the fullest capture of the season that they can have, to maintain their financial health, and to safely serve the patrons who are going to be here. And if that means that we have to have a lot of creative thinking, which, fully, I have a lot of faith in Amy Baxter as our licensing administrator, that she will work with town management to have some really great suggestions on how we can safely do that and allow our retail and restaurants to have their highest earning potential possible.
On Nantucket, whether you're talking about restaurants or lodging or even construction, to me, it all boils down to tourism. I think tourism is involved with every industry on the island. Because we're so dependent on tourism, if tourism takes a hit, everybody takes a hit. Do you think the island should be doing something to encourage other industries that are not reliant on tourism from starting on Nantucket? Is that the town's business to do that in the first place?
I think that's a really great question. I'm not sure that it is the town's responsibility to do that, but I also think that when the innovative ideas come to the table and they need policy support and licensing support, it is the town's responsibility to hear that and do the best we can to safely incorporate new ways of revenue generation. And we are all incredibly tied to tourism, and we are in the business of creating experiences for people. No matter what industry you're in, we want people to have a positive experience and come back. Many people choose, because of those positive experiences, to buy a home here and become a seasonal resident. And a reminder to us all that those seasonal residents of our budget or of our property taxes pay about 85 to 87% of those property taxes. So we have an obligation to continue to safely uh, deploy the ability for enjoyable experiences on Nantucket, safe, enjoyable experiences. And at the same time, it's the town's obligation to listen to new ideas. And if they're there, and I know that, Christy Ferrantella, a current select board member and head of the chamber, has been advocating for faster internet speeds since before the pandemic, so that we can start to look at people working remotely and in different gig economy industries. Awesome. And I think those innovators and those entrepreneurs need to let the town know what they need and how we can support them.
One of the many complications of the pandemic is the problem with visas. Many of Nantucket's summer employees have one kind of visa or another. They're coming from foreign countries. At the moment, it's difficult, if not impossible, for those folks to get visas. Now, this is not the town's decision to make, but is there a way town can influence governmental policy in Washington to correct this?
I think the best thing that we can do is to make sure that we're in constant communication with our state and federal legislators so that they're keenly aware of our issues. I know that we all like to think that Nantucket is special, and we are in so many ways. We are unique. I think that particular issue of visa and seasonal employment assistance can be found throughout the Cape and Islands. So the best thing we can do is make sure that we have a healthy communication relationship with those legislators who can help advocate for us at the table where those decisions are being made.
Let's move away from the pandemic to other items that a select board member is going to have to face at one time or another. The form of town government that we have has been discussed, criticized, praised for years, if not decades. And certain aspects of that have come to have more emphasis in the middle of the pandemic. For example, how do you conduct a town meeting? But in general, how do you feel about the form of Nantucket's government?
It's a really hard one for me because town meeting is to me, one of the last vestiges of true democracy in action. Anybody who's a registered voter of the town can attend and have their voices heard on any of the issues on the warrant. And I've been at many a town meeting, I'm sure you have too, where an issue that may not have seemed controversial going into town meeting becomes controversial, and you go in with your mind made up one way, and somebody stands up and says something that compels you, and you change your mind and you vote a different way. It's a beautiful process, but it's a limiting process. We have less and less people coming and attending town meeting, hearing constituents from all different demographics. It does not feel accessible to them and is hard. And you have a conversation with somebody who's in their 30s talking about the challenges of attending town meeting, and somebody in their 70s who's gone to every town meeting for 45 years or 50 years. And so one might say, but it's a matter of commitment, you make the time. And other people say, but it's time for a change, my voice isn't being heard. So I think the Town Government Study Committee plays a really, really important role in our community right now. Its very first, it's supposed to be meeting every so often. And so when it started to meet again a few years ago, I was on the committee and I had to come off and make time for other things in my life. But it's a great group of people who are studying what kinds of forms of government would be an option to us within the state, spending time interviewing those town managers or administrators or mayors. And really, I'm hopeful that very soon they will come up with a recommendation for us. I think we're going to see some non-binding questions on this year's ballot. Important for people to give their feedback on those questions. And I think it's a process that we really have to start engaging in rather soon, because we don't want to let nostalgia for a form of government that has worked for Nantucket for so long hold us back from progressing to a form of government that will be more inclusive.
You touched on the fact that fewer and fewer people are coming to annual town meeting. I think related to that is the fact that fewer and fewer people want to run for office. Many, actually almost all of the contests in the 2020 election are uncontested. Now the select board has 3 people running for 2 positions, as I said at the outset. Last year, there were 6 people running for 2 positions. What can the town do to encourage people to be more involved?
Well, I think it's a good observation, but as having been somebody who's been an incumbent before, sometimes not having opposition means that people are okay with who's running, and they want them to keep staying there and have the opportunity to do the work. So sometimes the smaller field of candidates can be because of a general sense of satisfaction in how things are going. I think the town does a very good job of making sure that town government, town manager, and town administration does a very good job of making sure we're aware of the timelines. But I really do think it's up to community leaders outside of the town manager's office to get people engaged. I think we are seeing that with the board and committee appointments. There have been members in our community who have actively gone out and sought people out to say, did you know about this commission? It's an appointment. It would be a great fit for you. We'd love to have you involved. And once we start getting more and more people in the field involved at any level of government, they kind of get the bug. And when those seats become available, are inspired and less intimidated to run for them. In 2017, my friend Jennifer Cohen and I started Women Engaged in Civic Action on Nantucket. And we held some workshops to demystify the process a little bit for particularly young women who were thinking about running for office or seeking an appointment to a board or commission, who didn't really understand the process or didn't necessarily know if they'd be qualified to do that. So um, I'm not sure that the town administration has a huge role to play, other than that they need to continue their transparency of what's available. But civic engagement is personal responsibility. And I've loved what NCTV has done for our town government during this pandemic. Probably more people watching select board and board of health meetings than ever before. That's what we need, is access that's convenient and helpful for people so they can stay informed. And then when they're informed, they're more inspired to want to run.
Before the select board meets weekly parts of the year, not every week, other parts of the year, but they're given a packet. And in some cases, that packet can be hundreds of pages. It's like sitting down and having to read a whole book within a week, in addition to living your life. There's been a huge increase over the last few decades in what the select board has to do. Is that sustainable the way it is now? Does that need to be looked at more carefully?
That's a really great question, and I don't know if I know the answer to it yet, to be honest, Charlie. I think that that goes back to your question on the form of government that we're in, and there is a great sense of responsibility placed on the select board, but there is with every board and commission just about that we have. And there's a lot of work to do. We are not a small rural town. We are at best suburban in probably close to small urban in our population size, particularly when you consider the seasonal spike. And our demographics are very different than they were 30 years ago, 20 years ago. So, of course, the volume of work and the nature of the work has shifted. And I just know that for me, I feel lucky to and committed to making sure I can stay on top of those issues. And when we can have the conversation about whether or not this is sustainable or not, be at the table to help guide our community to what's next.
One subject that the pandemic has, at least for the moment, eclipsed is housing. The problem is still there, and it's no one has found a silver bullet for it yet. But what are your thoughts on the housing situation on Nantucket?
Well, you just said it. There is no silver bullet. It's kind of like the parking issue, which maybe you'll ask me about later. But there's no sharp answer or one answer that's going to solve affordable housing. I think that we need, and we'll see so many of these projects are either coming online at Richmond. Tacoma Green just got its green light, and so we're going to see those apartments opening up. We're going to start to see some of that stock be built. And so long as we can stay on, have enough projects on that let us meet the shy list, then we can hold off on like unfriendly 40Bs and have more control about designing what kind of affordable housing solutions are right for Nantucket. I think that Tucker Holland and Brooke Moore are doing great work at the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as are all of the volunteers. Brian Sullivan, I know, is the chair of that committee. And I also think that we have great organizations who have been working on affordable housing solutions for decades. And it's finally getting its spotlight and a higher ranking of priority in all of our agendas. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this progresses.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned parking because it makes for an easy segue into my next question, which is limits of growth. I mean, sooner or later, Nantucket will reach some kind of brick wall, for lack of a better term, no pun intended. But how soon do you see that coming? What can be done in the meantime? What should be done in the meantime?
You know, I don't know if I see it the same way. I don't know that our conversation needs to be about limiting growth, but I think that we need to talk about sustainable support of the growth that we have. You know, we are no different really than any other resort community throughout the world, and it's a very desirable place to live. For people who are in the trades, you can make a really nice living year round. And so long as we can make sure that you have the option to rent or find stable housing, whether it's through renting or owning, we need those service providers, and we need teachers, we need police officers, we need nurses. So I don't know if I see on the forecast a red brick wall of danger, there's too many people here, but I do see that if we're not paying careful attention to how we're growing and growing out of the values that are important to our community, then that will create a loss, a sense of loss of those values, which is, I think, detrimental and scary for those of us who have lived and loved Nantucket for decades.
I have time for one last question, but it's a big one. And
Okay.
that's how Nantucket should be responding to climate change. Take as long as you want to answer that.
Well, that's a really broad question. I think that there are um, very smart minds. I'm very happy to see Vincent Murphy, and I'm the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee being formed and coming up with really strategic plans on coastal resiliency. I think we have some very smart minds looking at the impacts of what we do. Today, you're interviewing me on June 1st. It's the start of our first plastics ban. So I think that the town, again, in town government, our policies need to be focused on environmental sustainability. And it is part of our strategic plan. I know, again, it's probably one of those documents that's very long, and because of the coronavirus and its deep impact on the physical health and financial health and social emotional health of our community members, that strategic plan is tossed to the side for a minute. But the select board made a commitment to keep a focus on certain issues, and environmental sustainability is one of them. And I'm really looking forward to making sure that the decisions we make are financially responsible, but also protective of this beautiful environment we have.
Melissa Murphy, thank you for being part of Nantucket Community Television's coverage of the 2020 annual town election. And to all of our viewers, please be sure to vote on or before June 16th. I'm Charlie Walters. Thank you for tuning in.